Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, it is almost unbelievable that we are at a place which has slept for a number of years like a charmed princess. From the late 18th century until the early 21st century, so much beautiful has happened here. It was a house of art, a house of inspiration, and then it was taken away from us. Let's see whether we can breathe in new life into this building. And I would like to first thank and give the floor to the chairman of the board of the Riga Wagner Association, Mr. Māris Gails. Good afternoon. Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, dear guests. Mr. Wagner, ladies and gentlemen. Riga, the first theatre, the oldest public theatre in Riga and Latvia, today turns 240. This conference will specifically focus on the past and the future of this building. As far as the present is concerned, Riga, Richard Wagner Association of Society has very ambitious plans of returning this building to its former grandeur. And if we succeed, then hopefully in 2026 we will open the doors of this wonderful building to its visitors who will again be able to appreciate all the splendor of this building. With these wishes, I would like to conclude my introductory address. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Giles. We would also like to give the floor to the German ambassador to Latvia and Christian Helt to also say some introductory remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a wonderful morning. We're celebrating 240 years of a building that has contributed to this Gesamtkunstwerk, as I might call it, which is not just this house, but the city of Riga, which was already reuniting music and culture 240 years ago, and even longer than that. I'm particularly happy that soon we will enter another decisive stage in getting this project of making the Wagner Theatre again within, well, I'm not announcing anything now, but in the very near future. So, a big project to make this place come alive again as Richard Wagner knew it. I'm delighted that the German government can also contribute in that, because this is a joint European legacy. We will hear a lot more by much more knowledgeable people during this conference. I'm very much looking forward to that. I'm actually curious also to hear what the descendants of the Wietinghoff family will shortly be telling us. Just like to say a word of thanks and praise to Māris and Saiga Gaile, who are the hearts and the spirit of this project of reviving this theater and bringing all of us, Wagner community, Wietinghoff family, many knowledgeable people together here today. Also, if I might add, for this event with an active support of the Adenauer Foundation, much appreciated. And, well, without further ado, I would like to pass on the word, because I think we are all extremely curious to hear the accounts of why a Messine 240 years ago decided, hey, let's build a theater. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now let's get to the agenda. I'd like to invite the first speakers about von Wietinghoff's legacy, the family members of Mr. von Wietinghoff.
Also wir sprechen hier in Deutsch. Ich begrüße Sie ganz herzlich, liebes Publikum, liebe Gäste. Vorneweg, wir sind wirklich, wirklich aufgeregt. Ich stelle mich mal vor, mein Name ist Joachim von Vittinghoff. Ich lebe in Potsdam in Deutschland und neben mir steht meine Tochter Julia und vor uns sitzt meine wunderbare Frau Miriam und neben der Miriam sitzt der Sohn von der Julia, Jakob. Also ihr habt hier 3 Generationen Vittinghoff alleine hier heute vor euch und wir werden euch jetzt die anderen 6 Generationen, die es bis zu Otto Hermann geht, werden wir davon erzählen. Ich stelle mich selber auch noch vor, mein Beruf ist, ich bin Filmproduzent, ich habe seit den 60er Jahren bis 2011 Spielfilme produziert, großes deutsches Kino, internationale Koproduktionen mit Ungarn und Frankreich und auch Amerika.
Lettland könnte auch noch
Lettland
kommen, oder?
könnte noch kommen, das fehlt noch, genau. Und da reden wir später noch ein bisschen mehr drüber. Julia, was machst du denn?
Ich begrüße Sie auch recht herzlich. Ich bin Julia, ich bin Fotografin und Landschaftsarchitektin. Und du warst doch 1992 schon mal hier in Riga. Kannst du uns dann noch mal was darüber sagen?
Ja, also ich war 1992, also direkt im neuen Lettland, im neuen Staat, eingeladen vom Goethe-Institut, was ja hier seit vielen Jahren aktiv ist. Und die haben eine Filmreihe gemacht, also um jetzt den Bürgern auch zu zeigen, was wir in Berlin, in Deutschland erlebt haben, in der Mauerstadt. Und es war eine Filmreihe, die hieß Westberliner Filme. Und ich habe nur zufällig den letzten Film in Westberlin vor der Mauer gedreht, bevor die Mauer eingestürzt oder bevor die Mauer gebrochen ist. Und ich war mit diesem Film, Wedding hieß der, das ist ein Ortsteil von Berlin, war ich also hier in Riga und zum ersten Mal, wir wussten überhaupt nicht, ob irgendwelche Spuren der Familie noch zu sehen sind. Also weder wussten wir, dass es hier dieses Theater gibt. Vorne an der Straße ist ja das große Palais von dem Otto Hermann. Aber das Wichtigste ist natürlich Marienburg, also da kommen wir dann noch in Ruhe dazu. Aber ich war dann eingeladen, an einer Versammlung von einer Gesellschaft teilzunehmen, die übersetzt, weiß ich jetzt nicht genau, also Lettlands Weg. Das war also eine Gesellschaft, aus der dann später die Regierung entstanden ist, wenn ich das richtig verstanden habe. Und ich saß also da mit 400 Leuten in einem großen Versammlungssaal und wurden also lettische Reden gehalten, aus allen Wirtschaft und Kultur und aus allen Bereichen. Und ich habe immer nur so kurze Brocken an Übersetzungen bekommen und habe nicht so richtig verstanden, worum es geht, aber auf einmal ging es fiel immer der Name Vittinghoff. Ja? Und meine Begleitung stupste mich so an und sagte, du bist da gemeint und es tut mir leid, du musst jetzt leider mal nach vorne. Dann bin ich also nach vorne gegangen und habe da 400 Leuten in die Augen geschaut, wissend, dass ich der letzte Nachkomme, also aus dieser baltischen Familie bin. Und was haben die Leute gemacht? Die haben also nicht Buh und raus geschrien, sondern sie haben sage und schreibe 10 Minuten geklatscht. Also ich stehe jetzt heute noch hier und kriege Gänsehaut für diesen Moment, weil ich damit überhaupt nicht umgehen konnte. Und genau das habe ich auch gesagt. Bis ich hier vor Ihnen was sagen kann, wird noch viel, viel Zeit vergehen. Und die ist jetzt vergangen. Ist jetzt 30 Jahre her und heute stehen wir hier und heute wollen wir euch was erzählen von unserer Geschichte, Julia und ich, von der Familie. Wie geht's weiter? Moment.
Ich mache weiter jetzt.
Julia macht jetzt weiter, ja. Also wir haben uns gedacht, so einen Vortrag runterlesen. Wir sind ja beide keine Historiker und keine Wissenschaftler. Wir haben beide ganz normale oder ganz andere Berufe. Und Ah ja, da sieht man ja schon was. Und haben gedacht, dass es interessant ist, wenn wir das zusammen machen. Und Julia hat mich vor allem gefragt, Papa, wollen wir das nicht zusammen machen? Und natürlich gibt es nichts Besseres. Julia.
Ja, der Name unserer Familie wird das erste Mal 1230 in Westfalen erwähnt. Von dort brechen Arnoldus de Vittinghof und Konrad de Vittinghove als Kreuzritter Richtung Baltikum. Arnoldus war der erste Komtur auf Marienburg, Aluxne, das ist das Schloss, auf dem Otto Hermann seinen Sommersitz oder seinen Hauptsitz hatte. Und hier kann man die Familienwappen sehen. Was bedeuten diese Wappen denn?
Also das ist das Familienwappen der von Vittinghofs und es gibt endlos viele Schreibweisen und so weiter, aber immerhin haben sie also zusammen ein gemeinsames Wappentier, den Fuchs. Der Fuchs steht also oben auf dem Helm und der Fuchs im Profil ist eben der westfälische, der deutsche Fuchs im Deutschen Reich und der Fuchs, der auf der linken Seite, der zurückguckt, das ist der baltische Fuchs, das baltische Wappentier, der guckt zurück in die Heimat, obwohl sie ja jahrhundertelang nicht nach Hause gegangen sind. Und dann sieht man noch die Jakobsmuscheln, also weil sie eben hier dann auch über das Meer, die Vittinghoffs sind ja, die baltischen sind ja mit der Hanse hierher gekommen und haben sich dann hier niedergelassen. Wie geht's weiter, Julia? Aha, so. Ja, und wie sind wir denn jetzt mit dem Otto Hermann verwandt? Also wir müssen hier so langsam so durchfummeln jetzt ein bisschen.
Genau, Arnoldus de Vittinghof und Konrad, das ist eine Weile her gewesen, ist im 14. Jahrhundert bis 1722 Otto Hermann geboren wird. Sein Vater ist Hermann und seine Frau Helene, eine Geborene von Helmersen. Otto Hermann, sein Sohn Burkhard, hatte einen Sohn Alexander, es kam noch ein Alexander und dann kam schon deine Großmutter Helene, meine Urgroßmutter, dein Vater Kurt, du und ich. Und
was sieht man da auf den Scherenschnitten?
Ja, der Scherenschnitt ist von 1781 und das ist die Familie von Otto Hermann. Hier sieht man Otto Hermann und seine Frau Anna und 4 seiner Kinder. Und
Ja,
was
hat
war
er
jetzt?
aber mehr, ne? Er hat ja mehr, hast du
Ja,
gesagt,
kommt
ne?
noch.
Ja.
Und was war denn jetzt das Besondere an Otto Hermann? Kannst du noch was darüber erzählen?
Ja, also, ich meine, Sie sehen schon, wir umfassen hier eine Geschichte von 800 Jahren, also von der ersten Nennung des Familiennamens. Und es hat sich natürlich weit verbreitet, auch in Deutschland, aber eben auch im Baltikum, in allen baltischen Staaten bis nach Russland. Aber die Vittinghoffs waren auch in Skandinavien unter dem schwedischen König, unter dem polnischen König. Es hat sich ja die Geschichte dauernd gedreht. Und wir haben jetzt das Problem, dass wir in 20 Minuten 800 Jahre erzählen wollen, aber wir konzentrieren uns schon auf den Otto Hermann. Otto Hermann ist 1722 in Riga geboren und 1792 in St. Petersburg gestorben. Er war von 1741 bis 1757 war er also ein Offizier, wie die meisten Barone mussten ja ihren Königen, ihren Herren dienen und das war natürlich meistens mit ihnen in die Schlacht zu ziehen und irgendwelche großen Kriege zu führen. Der 30-jährige Krieg haben auf allen Seiten deutsche Vittinghof-Offiziere gegeneinander Krieg geführt. Also ist die Geschichte total verrückt. Und ja, also Otto Hermann war bis 1757 eben unter der Kaiserin Elisabeth russischer Offizier und hat viele wichtigen Schlachten, das müssen jetzt Historiker machen, das ist nicht unsere Aufgabe, das wissen wir auch gar nicht genau, was er alles gemacht hat und seinen letzten militärischen Rang. Aber auf jeden Fall hat er gesagt, jetzt ist genug, ich möchte jetzt noch was anderes machen, ich habe ganz andere Interessen. Und ist eben hier in Riga, nach Marienburg, wir haben ja in Marienburg gelebt und wurde dann hier in Riga Regierungsrat, also Senator und Geheimrat, als russischer im Range eines russischen Staatssekretärs. Also er war sehr eng mit der Zarin verbunden. Julia, wie geht es dann weiter?
Er wohnte hier im Riga in dem sogenannten Höfchen Solitude, wie man sieht, ein kleines Höfchen, das ist ironisch gemeint, aber sie nannten es Höfchen. Das war vor den Toren Rigas, welches er von seinem Vater geerbt hatte. In dieser Zeit, als er jetzt in Riga war...
Darf ich dich da kurz nochmal unterbrechen?
Ja.
Weil das haben wir jetzt eigentlich gar nicht vorgehabt zu erzählen, aber es ist total spannend, weil ihr fragt natürlich, wo ist denn das heute? Das gibt es nicht mehr. Es gab also in einer kriegerischen Auseinandersetzung kamen die französischen oder preußischen Truppen, nee, preußischen nicht, aber die französischen, glaube ich, auf Riga zu und wollten eine Belagerung machen. Da hat man einfach die ganze Vorstadt einfach abgebrannt, damit da ein freies Feld ist und dass sich dort also es war ein militärisches Opfer, was man hier gebracht hat.
Ja, in seiner Zeit nach dem Militärdienst hier in Riga widmet er sich seinen Gütern, und die hauptsächlich Landwirtschaft betrieben, aber er hatte auch zahlreiche Geschäfte. Zum Beispiel gründete er die erste Branntweinbrennerei hier und besaß Gerbereien, Ledergerbereien.
Aber auch damals schon gerne getrunken, ne?
Sowie Webereien. Und neben seinen Geschäften hatte er die schönen Künste für sich entdeckt, oder er war ein großer Kunstliebhaber. Und darüber kannst du uns noch mal was erzählen.
Ja, also neben seinen geschäftlichen Tätigkeiten, die immens gewesen sein müssen, also er hat ja offensichtlich auch das Geld gehabt, solche Häuser zu bauen, solche Paläste zu bauen. Also er hat dann vorne an der Straße das große Palais, wo heute New Yorker, ein schwedisches Kaufhaus ist das, glaube ich, eingezogen ist. Ich erinnere mich noch, wir waren ja 2004 noch mal hier, da war das völlig entkernt, das Haus, also die Außenfassade ist stehen geblieben, und dann hat man das innen dann neu hergerichtet. Und er war ein großer Theater- und Musikfan und wollte nicht weit gehen und hat dann einfach hier im Hinterhof, wenn man so will, auf dem Rückgebäude seines Palais, hat er hier dieses Theater eingerichtet. Und das war eben nicht nur ein Theater, und er hat eine deutschsprachige berühmte Schauspielgruppe hier engagiert gehabt und hat 1782 tatsächlich das Theater mit Emilia Galotti mit der Uraufführung hier eröffnet. Ja.
Nicht die Uraufführung von dem Theaterstück, aber...
Nein, aber er hat das Theater eröffnet, 82, deswegen sind wir hier mit den 240 Jahren, das ist ja das Datum. Ja. Und also im September heißt es, also deswegen sind wir tatsächlich jetzt hier im richtigen Datum. Dann hat er ein Orchester auch gehabt mit 24 Musikern, was also auch immens ist, wenn man sich das vorstellt, also ein Schauspielensemble, ein Orchester zu haben und das Ganze auch zu betreiben. Er war sowohl der Theaterdirektor als der Musikdirektor und hat hier groß Kultur gemacht. Und warum ist er dann eigentlich weggegangen, Julia?
Katharina II., Russland von Kaiserin, berief ihn 1787 in ihre Dienste, und er ging nach St. Petersburg. Es war eine große Veränderung für sein Leben. Immerhin war er schon 65 Jahre alt. Er hatte sich hier ein großes Leben aufgebaut, aber er hat trotzdem nicht lange überlegt, diesen Posten zu übernehmen. Und zwar war das der Posten der Generaldirektor des allrussischen Medizinministeriums. Also er ist sozusagen der erste Gesundheitsminister in Russland geworden. Also er konnte diesen Posten eigentlich nicht ablehnen. Seine Familie ist hier geblieben, seine Frau, und hat seine Geschäfte für ihn hier weitergeführt. Und er hat in St. Petersburg dieses Haus, was man hier sehen kann, am Fluss Moika im Zentrum der Stadt bauen lassen. Das war sein Wohnhaus, und das Theater hier wurde eine Zeit lang unter der Leitung des Schauspielers Meyerer weitergeführt, im Sinne Otto Hermann, bis es die Gesellschaft Muße übernahm. Aber ich denke, darüber werden wir vielleicht noch im Laufe des Tages mehr hören. Über diese Gesellschaft zum Beispiel wissen wir auch nicht so viel. Und jetzt haben wir auch schon viel über Otto Hermann gehört. und vielleicht kannst du noch was zu seinen Gütern sagen, die ja heute noch erhalten sind auch.
Ja, also die Häuser habt ihr schon gesehen, das Haus sehen wir auch, also er muss richtig Geld gehabt haben, sagen wir mal so. Ich würde mal fast sagen, wahrscheinlich mache ich jetzt einen Riesenfehler, aber er war in einer gewissen Art und Weise ein Oligarch. Ja? Weil wenn man das hier sieht, also Sie sehen hier Marienburg in der Mitte und drumherum hat er eigentlich alles aufgekauft, was nicht nied- und nagelfest war, würde ich mal sagen. Und auf der linken Seite, das könnt ihr natürlich jetzt nicht so gut lesen, aber es sind sage und schreibe 32 Güter. Und er musste ja im Sommer, also seine Sommerresidenz und sein Hauptwohnsitz war ja Marienburg. Also er ist von Riga 200 Kilometer durchs Land gefahren und wollte natürlich gerne auch nicht jetzt in irgendeinem Bauernhof und Gasthof übernachten, sondern hat dann dort, wo er übernachtet hat, auch hat in Uxküll ein sehr schönes Schloss gebaut, damit er da seine Pferde ausruhen kann, nach 100 Kilometern und am nächsten Morgen weiter nach Marienburg fährt. Und ja, und jetzt kommen wir natürlich nach Marienburg dann. Julia, oder? Ja. Also hier seht ihr diese wunderschöne Karte von 1805, so sieht es natürlich heute nicht mehr aus, aber genau so hat Otto Hermann das auch erlebt, diesen Ort. Und ganz besonders interessant ist jetzt hinten links, sehen Sie die Burgruine vom Arnoldus Fittinghofe von irgendwie 1300 oder 1420. Ne? Also die waren schon, aber das ist aber nicht die Linie von dem Arnold Fittinghof, das ist relativ kompliziert, die geht jetzt nicht straight durch bis hierher, sondern die hat sich oft verzweigt und die Fittinghofs sind aber immer wieder an diesen Ort zurückgekommen und Otto Hermann war eben dann der Erste, der hat es dann von anderen Besitzern gekauft, Marienburg, und wollte dann dort auch seine Residenz eigentlich errichten. Und hier sieht man noch nicht es gibt ja ein ganz neues Schloss, da kommen wir gleich dazu, und zu seinen Söhnen, die dann da alles Mögliche gemacht haben. Man hat auf der Karte sehr schön die Kirche gesehen und ja. Julia, sagst du da was zu der Kirche? Die ist ja ganz berühmt auch.
Otto Hermann ließ diese Kirche 1781 bauen, auch von Christoph Haberland. Und sie war zu dieser Zeit die größte und prächtigste Kirche Livlands. Und man vermutet, das, was mein Vater gerade schon gesagt hat, dass er mit dieser Kirche, das war der Beginn, und er wollte Marienburg zu seiner Residenz ausbauen. Nur durch den Weggang von Riga sind diese Pläne quasi nicht mehr umgesetzt worden. Seine Frau Anna, hatten wir vorhin schon gehört, sie blieb ja zurück in Riga. Und was hat sie da gemacht?
Ach ja, da sehen wir sie, ja. Also wir sehen jetzt beide sozusagen, auch mit irgendwelchen wichtigen Orden, die wir aber nicht identifiziert haben, was sie wirklich bedeuten. Aber es ist ganz klar, dass beide also sich verdient gemacht hatten. Die Ulrike ist eine Geborene von Münich, Gräfin Münich. Und sie war eine, wie man sieht, sehr schöne, großherzige und großzügige Frau, aber auch sehr geschäftstüchtig, weil der Otto Hermann war ja auch mit seiner Kunst beschäftigt, also irgendjemand musste auch das Business machen. Also Anna hat schwer im Hintergrund sich um die Geschäfte gekümmert und man weiß tatsächlich, dass auch Otto Hermann keine seiner geschäftlichen Aktivitäten ohne seine Frau gemacht hat. Und nach seinem Tod, also er ist vor ihr gestorben, hat sie noch 24 Jahre lang natürlich sich um ihre Kinder, aber auch um das ganze Vermögen gekümmert. Was war dann jetzt mit den Kindern, Julia?
Also sie hatten 7 Kinder, wovon 4 relativ früh schon gestorben sind. Hier sieht man Juliane und Burkhard. Und ich erzähle Ihnen jetzt noch was über Juliane. Sie war verheiratet mit Burkhard von Krüdener, daher kommt auch ihr Nachname Juliane von Krüdener. Sie war eine sehr besondere Frau, sie war Pietistin, Beraterin des russischen Zaren und Schriftstellerin. Ihr wichtigstes Werk war Valerie, ein autobiografischer Liebesroman, der 1803 in Paris erschien. und auch in Deutsch und Russisch übersetzt wurde. In allen 3 Sprachen war der Roman sehr erfolgreich. Und das romantische Naturempfinden in ihren Werken soll auf ihre glücklichen Jahre in Marienburg und Kosse, das ist ein Gut in Estland, was sie geerbt hatte, zurückzuführen sein. Sie hatte starke religiöse Einfluss auf die Petersburger Gesellschaft, insbesondere auf den zur christlichen Mystik neigenden Zar Alexander I. Und sie wurde seine geistige Freundin und bewog ihn zur Heiligen Allianz. Sie vertrat den Zaren sogar 1815 auf dem Wiener Kongress.
Also das ist ja schon eine abenteuerliche Geschichte, dass die Tochter ihrem Vater so nachgegangen ist und sich so exponiert hat. Das war ja für die damalige Zeit, haben Frauen keine Romane geschrieben. Ja? Also
Wenige, es gab schon
so gut wie nie. Also auf jeden Fall haben sie sich nicht exponiert. Sie hat in Paris mit dem Geld des Vaters einen Salon geführt, in dem also auch Goethe und Schiller ein- und ausgegangen sind und viele intellektuelle Europäer bei ihr zu Gast waren. Und sie war natürlich am Sonnenhof und hat dort Partys gefeiert. Also das ist eine vollkommen verrückte Geschichte mit ihr. Und
die Folie habe ich vergessen.
da sieht man, also das haben wir das Bild noch nicht gezeigt. Also es kommt jetzt erst, oder was?
Nee, ich habe es aber schon gesagt.
Okay.
Also jetzt erzählen wir noch mal was über Burkhard, der ja das Schloss Marienburg geerbt hat.
Eine Sache habe ich vergessen bei der Juliane, was das natürlich hier eine große Rolle spielt, weil wir hier im Musikhaus sind und hier war Wagner. Beethoven hat für Juliane eine Komposition gemacht. Ja? Also das will schon was bedeuten. Also wenn nicht nur die Literaturszene, sondern auch die Musikszene, die europäische, sie wahrgenommen hat. Ja, jetzt kommt der Burkhard. Der Burkhard erbte, das hat man also vorhin auf dieser Postkarte schön gesehen, dieses alte Schloss, das ist abgebrannt, oder? Das ist also abgebrannt. Sie waren ja meistens aus Holz zu der Zeit. Und der Burkhard hat dann 1993 ein riesiges neues Gutshaus gebaut mit 50 Metern Länge und hat dort also geherrscht, sage ich mal. Und dann hat er eben, nicht nur das neue Schloss gebaut, sondern er hat also einen großen, spektakulären Park angelegt, wo Julia ist ja Landschaftsarchitektin, du erzählst uns jetzt da was dazu, oder?
Ja, genau. Burkhard war ganz up-to-date natürlich. Also der barocke Garten war nicht mehr en vogue sozusagen und zu dieser Zeit kam der Stil des englischen Landschaftsgarten auf, also ließ er in Marienburg einen ganz tollen englischen Landschaftspark anlegen, der auch heute noch erhalten ist.
Und der ist renoviert, soweit ich weiß. Also wir fahren morgen hin und wollen uns das alles mal anschauen, ja.
Zu dem Thema englischer Landschaftsgarten lässt sich natürlich sehr viel sagen, ich mache es kurz. Also die Geometrie des Barocks ist verschwunden und es wird sehr natürlich, die Natur wird hervorgehoben, aber die Natur wird auch inszeniert und zu diesen Inszenierungen gehören solche Bauwerke, wie man hier sehen kann, so kleine Tempel, Brücken, auch so Ruinen, deswegen die Burg, die es auf der Insel gab, die wurde quasi mit inszeniert in diesen Landschaftspark. Und jetzt kommen wir noch zu dem heutigen Schloss, das heute noch steht, das so aussieht.
So sieht das heute aus. Wenn Sie jetzt nach Alluxne fahren, dann kommt man direkt an der großen Straße. Also auf der linken Seite ist direkt am See, also das Schloss steht direkt am See, da geht aber die Straße durch, was ja nicht so doll ist, aber so ist halt die Zeit, hat das so gemacht. Und das ist auch erbaut, das ist also im neogotischen Stil erbaut. Das war also damals einfach Mode. Und wenn man jetzt nach Berlin geht, nach Potsdam, dann gibt es da wie heißt das? Das Babelsberger Schloss. Und man ist sich ganz sicher, dass es wahrscheinlich, dass die Architekten sich kannten und es sieht ganz ähnlich aus. Also wenn Leute kommen und sagen, das ist ja wie in Babelsberg, so von der Architektur her. Ja, Das steht heute noch so, genau. Jetzt,
Genau.
wie geht
Ja,
es jetzt
also
weiter?
das hat nicht der Burkhard gebaut, sondern sein Sohn später Alexander, und das Schloss wurde 1861 eingeweiht. Wir haben jetzt noch ein paar Bilder aus der Zeit, in denen es schon Fotografien gab. Hier sieht man Arnold und Helene, die Großeltern von meinem Vater, also meine Urgroßeltern.
Also die, gehen nochmal zurück, die in Zivil da sitzen, also
Ja,
das ist der
warte.
Arnold, mein Großvater,
Hier sieht
und,
man die-
und hier die Helene. Und wahrscheinlich sind das ist also 1905, das Foto, wahrscheinlich sind es historisch gesehen russische Offiziere noch aus dem Zarenreich. Ne? Also es bricht ja jetzt alles zusammen und wahrscheinlich gab es dann schon auch dort also Aufstände und irgendwie wurden die da beschützt. Keine Ahnung, wissen wir nicht. Gibt es keine Unterlagen und es ist dann Sache der Historiker.
So,
Ach so.
ich bin dran. Mein Vater fällt mir ins Wort. So, das war nämlich meine Seite. Jetzt, das ist mein Lieblingsbild. Dieses Bild lasse ich mir nicht nehmen von dir. Das ist der Wasserschöpfer. Das ist ein Bild von 1901 und zeigt Helene am zugefrorenen Marienburger See, wie das Wasser geholt wird für das Schloss. Also zu der Zeit gab es ja auch noch kein fließendes Wasser.
Ja, also ich finde, das Bild hat einen Moment, sollte man einen Moment mal anschauen. Das ist aus einem Fotoalbum, was in unserem Besitz ist, mit Goldschrift, mit Goldfeder beschriftet. Und sind sehr schöne Bilder drin und wir werden dafür sorgen, dass die digitalisiert werden, dass die auch nach Alluxne ins Schloss kommen werden, dass man dann diese Bilder in Ruhe anschauen kann. Aber was eben für mich so bedeutend ist hier die Jahreszahl 1901 und das Bild gibt noch so eine große Ruhe und da ist noch alles, die Welt ist noch in Ordnung. Und wir wissen ja alle, was dann gekommen ist und wie alles aus den Fugen gerät. Und eben die russische Revolution und der Erste Weltkrieg steht vor der Türe und es ist eben nicht so weit weg. Also ich meine, das ist meine Großmutter. Mein Vater, Kurt, wird 1907 in Marienburg geboren und sitzt hier als zweijährig. Wenn ihr guckt, ihr seht ihn hier vor dem Tor, hier rechts. Ja. Und ich kann es selber nicht fassen, dass ich hier stehe und dass das mein Vater sein soll. Ja. Und dass das so nah, die Geschichte so nah ist und dass doch diese 2 Weltkriege, die jetzt um die Welt gehen, alles zerstört haben und alles auch verändert haben auf eine ganz verrückte Art und Weise. Und jetzt bist du ein bisschen zu schnell gewesen.
Wir sind aber ein bisschen knapp schon.
Ja, also russische Revolution, Erster Weltkrieg. Wir schreiben das Jahr 1920. Meine Großeltern müssen das Baltikum verlassen und siedeln auf einem Bauernhof bei Würzburg. Also ich bin ja ein geborener Münchner, ein Bayer, also ich bin dann schon sozusagen jetzt in meiner neuen Heimat, aber ich bin so auch mit meinem Bruder Kurt, der schon verstorben ist 6 Jahre älter, der ist also auch, wir sind beide in München zur Welt gekommen, also wir sind die ersten Nachkommen aus dieser langen Geschichte, die nicht mehr hier auf die Welt gekommen sind und weil es halt auch 2 Weltkriege waren. Also gehe ich erst nochmal, also mein 13-jähriger Vater jetzt als Bauernbub, aber die Fittinghoffs waren immer Landwirte, ne? Die haben immer Landwirtschaft gehabt und das war eigentlich ihr Hauptberuf und hier der Großvater da beim Obst, der Arno und Arnold beim Obst, also Arno ist der Bruder meines Vaters und Arnold ist der Vater und mein Großvater. Ja. Also das ist ein Gut, das ist jetzt nichts Riesiges, das ist ein schönes Landhaus gewesen und es ist tatsächlich bis über den Zweiten Weltkrieg noch im Besitz der Familie geblieben. Und nach dem Krieg, wo alles weg war, gab es es noch und mein Vater hat in seinem Nachlass meiner Mutter gesagt, sie soll das stückchenweise verkaufen und damit die Kinder großziehen. Jetzt habe ich ja schon einen großen Schritt gemacht. Hier seht ihr jetzt meinen Vater Also rechts seht ihr den Arnold nochmal, den Großvater, der eben ja mit der Helene in Marienburg gelebt hat. Und das ist jetzt der Kurt, also den Arnold, den haben wir jetzt hier gar nicht im Bild. Also ihr seht hier ganz unten, ganz jung den Vater noch und dann oben mit meinem Bruder Kurt. Jetzt wird es dramatisch. Und unten sieht man mich ganz klein, also noch einjährig im Laufstall rum, aber irgendwie erkenne ich mich wieder. Also der ist mir nicht fremd da. Ja, jetzt ich bin 1941 geboren, mein Vater wird Anwalt in München und stirbt mit 33 Jahren vor meiner Geburt, aber nicht im Krieg, sondern an einer Krankheit, an einer Diphtherie, und es gab noch keine Antibiotika. Also in England, wenn kein Krieg gewesen wäre, da gab es schon Penicillin. In Deutschland ist er also im Dezember 40 gestorben. Ich werde 1941 mitten im Zweiten Weltkrieg geboren und erlebe mit meiner Mutter 4 Jahre unter Bombennächten und jetzt die Bilder, die wir aus der Ukraine sehen, jeden Tag, erinnern mich traumatisch sehr. Also obwohl ich keine sehr konkreten Erinnerungen habe, aber auf jeden Fall war München schwer bombardiert auch und ganz Schwabing, wo wir gewohnt haben, war zerbombt. Meine Mutter ist 3-mal ausgebombt. Das heißt, sie ist 3-mal nach Hause gekommen und alles, was ihr Leben bedeutet hatte, war weg. Und so geht der Krieg zu Ende. Das ist jetzt viel zu schnell. Im Sommer 1945, die baltische Großmutter Helene war beim Roten Kreuz ganz irgendwie Präsidentin für Osteuropa. Deswegen ist sie erst also in den Monaten nach Kriegsende mit irgendwelchen Flüchtlingstrecks zurückgekommen. Im Sommer 1945 steht die baltische Großmutter Helene mit 2 kleinen Koffern vor der Einzimmerwohnung ihrer Schwiegertochter Elisabeth, meiner Mutter, und den beiden Enkelkindern Kurt und Joachim. Sie stirbt 1951 in München. Also der andere Sohn, der Arnold, ist im April 1945 in Berlin verschollen. Also beide Söhne waren schon tot. Und was geblieben ist, ihr Mann ist 43 gestorben. Und was ihr geblieben ist, sie muss sich vorstellen, dass sie am Zahnhof noch auf den Bällen war in St. Petersburg. Und diese beiden Weltkriege haben das alles platt gemacht. Und was bleibt, waren eben die beiden Enkelkinder, aber doch auch irgendwie eine Hoffnung. Also wir sind ja jetzt irgendwie, haben wir weitergemacht. Und jetzt gibt es ja die baltischen Ritterschaften. Das sind Familienverbände, die sich also alle baltischen Familien haben sich dann irgendwo in Deutschland wiedergefunden und pflegen also auch ihre Geschichte und ihre Vergangenheit. Und es gibt also regelmäßig alle 2 oder 3 Jahre treffen sich die Familien, die haben zusammen da ein Schloss gekauft bei Kassel und im Schloss Höhenscheid. Und hier seht ihr ein Foto von einem unserer letzten Familientage, die natürlich durch Corona auch unterbrochen waren. Und ihr seht, das ist also nur ein kleiner Ausschnitt der Familie. Die Fittinghoffs sind in Amerika und überall. Es gibt sogar noch in Russland welche, die man vergessen hat da, ja, und in Skandinavien. Also es ist eine riesige Familie unter dem Namen Fittinghoff. Und wenn sie nicht gestorben sind, leben sie noch heute. Vielen Dank.
Liels paldies. Paldies.
Thank you. I would like to thank the family of Mr. Feetinghof. Would anyone like to ask any questions to any of the members of the Feetinghof family, Joachim or Julia? Or, yes, Matthias, please.
Microphones.
Da hast du gesagt, ja, die gingen dann einfach weg und da kann es ja verschiedene Gründe geben und ob es die Landreform war, die Enteignung, also was hat die sozusagen aus Livland verscheucht? Kannst du das noch ein bisschen ausführen?
Wir versuchen das, wir gehen ruhig nochmal auf die Bühne, noch ein bisschen was, war ja auch vorgesehen, Fragen und Antworten. Die genauen Umstände und so weiter wissen wir nicht. Also so historisch, grob historisch, muss es so gewesen sein. Es gab ja dann Bodenreformen erstmal, also 1921, glaube ich, wurde ja die lettische Regierung zum ersten Mal ausgerufen. Da gab es eine große Bodenreform, wo also von, weiß ich glaube, 15.000 Hektar auf 50 Hektar das runtergeschraubt wurde. Damit ist natürlich das ganze Feudalsystem zusammengebrochen, weil man nicht mit 50 Hektar irgendwie 60 Zimmerwohnungen und Ländereien betreiben kann. Und was jetzt zum Beispiel an Aufständen, es gibt ja durchaus also auch Geschichten, wo dann die Bauern einfach in die Häuser rein sind und die Axt ihren Herren in den Kopf gehauen haben. Also es war ja schon dramatisch und es muss sich auch die russische Revolution hat ja hier also bestimmt heftig reingehauen und dieses eine Foto, was ich unglaublich finde, wo mindestens da 10, 12 russische Offiziere, also ich denke, das sind russische Offiziere von der Armee, dann muss das alles irgendwie besetzt gewesen sein. Und natürlich hat man gemerkt, dass das, oder sagen wir mal, die kluge Helene und ihr Mann haben gemerkt, dass hier irgendwie das nicht gut ausgeht. Ja? Und es ist ja, das darf man nicht vergessen, 1920, es ist ja der Erste Weltkrieg schon durch die Welt gefahren. Ja? Also es war schon alles irgendwie einmal umgedreht, würde ich sagen. Und dann hat man einfach gesagt, okay, es gibt ja Heim ins Reich. Also es gibt so einen schönen Witz von den Letten, von den Balten. Nach 700 Jahren sind wir plötzlich Heim ins Reich. Ja? Also die mussten weg und spätestens 1939, das ist also auch historisch, was ich weiß, gibt es ja den Hitler-Stalin-Pakt, wo man also alle Deutschen aufgefordert hat, sofort das Land zu verlassen und dann eben die Sowjets das Land übernommen haben. Also ich erinnere mich so, ich habe so Begegnungen gehabt und viele haben gesagt, also wisst ihr seid ja also unsere Unterdrücker gewesen, aber so schlecht wie bei den Russen ist es uns nie gegangen bei euch. Ja, das ist so eine Geschichte. Aber was wirklich im Detail passiert ist und mit den Einzelnen, ich weiß nur, dass alle meine Onkels, also meine Patenonkels, meine Mutter hat also so ihre Lieblingsonkels aus den Fittinghofs, waren alle meine Patenonkels, weil ja mein Vater nicht mehr gelebt hat, hat er gesagt, die Kinder sollen also irgendwie gut betreut sein. Die sind alle ausnahmslos auf den Schlachtfeldern gestorben. Also 45 gab es keine. Es gab einfach keine Onkels mehr und keine. Es hat dann Jahre gedauert, bis man sich irgendwie. Also ich musste schon, das muss ich schon sagen, also ich musste schon mein Leben komplett neu erfinden, weil das gab es nicht. Also ich meine, ich habe ja praktisch überhaupt keine Verbindung mehr gehabt in das alte Leben und bin da im Nachkriegsdeutschland in München aufgewachsen und wusste irgendwie so, schwummerte da so im Hintergrund diese Familiengeschichte, die 800 Jahre alt ist, aber es hat überhaupt letztendlich keine Bedeutung für mich gehabt in meinem Leben, in meiner Entwicklung. Gibt es noch Fragen hier aus dem
Vielleicht nicht. Jo, mums ir diemžēl jāturās laika rāmjos.
Unfortunately, we need to work according to the agenda. We will now proceed with the agenda. It's my honor to introduce the next speaker, Ilona Brege, Richard Wagner and his musical Friends is the title of her presentation.
Sveicināti!
Good afternoon. While we are setting up the presentation, I would like to first and foremost underline that I'm extremely delighted that this September, when the Riga First Public Theatre, Riga City Theatre, celebrates its 240th anniversary, we're talking about this theatre, its past, the future, and the present, and it is my honor today to share with you the history of 2 years in the life of this theatre when Richard Wagner worked here. But as long as we don't have any images on the screen, let me just recollect a reminiscence. Time 3 decades ago when we celebrated the 210th anniversary of the Riga City Theatre. We had a number of concerts, and in Menzendorf's house we also hosted a huge conference, and I'm happy that my 2 colleagues that back in 1998 were organizing the 210th anniversary of the theatre are present among us today. Music historian Mr. Klotinch, and the director who staged also the opening concert and who produced the theatre, and was costume designer Mr. Gailitz. Thank you for really being such wonderful partners 3 decades ago, organizing the 210th anniversary of the theatre. So Richard Wagner and his musical friends at the Riga City Theatre. 2 years Richard Wagner spent in Riga working and living have been well researched by music historians, and it seems that almost everything has been already researched. There's nothing else to add. However, very rarely do we talk about or mention the musicians, opera singers and orchestra musicians with whom Richard Wagner has produced operas at the Riga City Theatre, and people who played in his concerts conducted by him. In my speech I will refer to some of the memories of Richard Wagner in to his biography, as well as other materials and documents that I have found around Latvian libraries and I have researched and collected. Because a couple of years have gone by since I released this wonderful book that I authored, which was titled Theatres in Ancient Riga, that look back at the history of Latvian theatres from 1782 until 1863. So a couple of years have passed since. Richard Wagner, in his autobiography, My Leben, writes that he had few friends and acquaintances here in Riga, because in Riga he realized much clearer what his goals and aims of life are: to create monumental operas. In Wagner's and his wife's apartment, many theatre people came by quite often, while with outside theatre he had very few acquaintances among residents of Riga. One of his closest friends, according to him, was the chapel master Franz Lebermann. He described him as not very talented, nevertheless a decent musician. Franz Lebermann arrived to Riga in 1834. He was a good violinist, and he worked for the Riga City Theatre as the choir master and concert master, later on as the chapel master, the second, or the junior chapel master. Richard Wagner held symphonic concerts in Riga, and Leibman also played together with the orchestra in those concerts. The string quartet was very important for the musical life of Riga, and Franz Lebermann was the first violin in this string quartet that he founded together with his theatre colleagues, the violinist Karl Lotzer, alto player Karl von Hermann, and a cello player Karl von Lützow. Here you can see a concert program of one of their first concerts in 1837-1838. They opened a series of concerts on 9th of October, playing Mozart's, Haydn's and Beethoven's pieces for string quartet, and then later added Spohr and other late 19th century composer pieces. Lebermann lived in Riga until the end of his life, until 1878 in Riga, and he was the director of the Riga Musical Society. He was also the cantor of the Riga city church, and he created a Singverein in 1843, or the Singing Society of Riga. And he also organized or produced many vocal, instrumental, or a cappella concerts, and he worked in Leipzig for his 2 seasons, but later on returned to Riga, and he's authored a number of operas and oratorials, and for example the Funeral March, that is better known. But today we'll have an opportunity to listen to something more upbeat, Invitation to Polka, recorded, by the way, 30 years ago, right here in the Richard Wagner Hall. We'll listen to a little piece out of this production, but as I already mentioned, Wagner described Franz Leben as not much talented, but a notable violinist. Let's have a listen in.
Well, it's quite the atmosphere of Mostar society. You all know that we are in this Mostar society, and this piece of music really reflects the events held by this association. But now let's turn to opera singers who performed together at the Riga City Theatre when Wagner was conducting. I have to mention first of all that during his first season in Riga, Wagner's sister-in-law Amalia Planer was engaged, and she sang leading roles as Leonora in Beethoven's Fidelio, Bellini Romeo, and on the 25th of October 1837, just after Wagner's arrival, and later also of Norma performance. She was singing at Norma performance. We see here also other colleagues. We see the married couple Kehlere. I will speak later also about Karl Günther and other singers. The main opera roles were sung also by Agathe Julia Reitmeier. Albert Wrede was also engaged, and Anton Jansson. I haven't found very good references about several of the singers I just mentioned. I cannot really say that they were praised highly. However, Amalie Planer was praised by Wagner himself. She had good voice, but she had lost her leading position, and in 1838 she married von Meck, general at the Russian army, and she stopped her career as a singer. Upon leaving the stage in 1838, she was singing Cherubino's role in Mozart's Figaro's Wedding. Now let's look at the billboard which of this concert held at the Blackhead's house. And here we see that the first soprano had been Caroline Pollard, who arrived in Riga half a year after Wagner in February 1838, and she sang here until 1840. And later she performed in other places in Germany, in Hamburg and in other theaters. And Caroline Pollard, her performance were highly praised by music and theater critics in Riga. She sang Norma and the Duchess at Figaro's Wedding and Giulietta in Bellini's opera. I also have to mention bass Karl Günther. Here we also see that tenor Jansson is mentioned in Günther. here on this billboard. Already in 1837, in autumn, when reviewing Don Juan, which was conducted by Wagner, Ginter was highly praised as Leporello. And in another opera by Bertram, Robert the Devil, again she was highly praised due to his very dramatic performance and understanding of the role. The diabolic spirit found in his performance magnificent manifestation. Karl Ginter had sung Figaro, Osmin Zarastro, also Figaro. At Riga City Theatre, Ginter also was producing and directing opera performances, and he had very good education. He had studied at Leipzig University. Soon after arriving in Riga on the 1st of September 1837, Blum's singer performance Maria Maxa and Michael was produced, and we all know that Wagner's first piece that was composed was an aria that was inserted into this show. And Wagner himself had said that he had composed this for a very talented bass Ginter. And now we'll listen to the second piece of music.
Mut will sich regen in des Mannes fester Brust. Aus den Fluren bluten gegen mich die Kindheit süße Lust. Aus der Fluren bluten gegen mir den Kindheit reine Lust. Meine Kindheit reine Lust. Ja, meine Kindheit reine Lust.
So this is Joris Adamsons from our opera, but let's listen to the second part of this aria written by Wagner in Riga, and now the third example.
Und die Trommel wirbelt, Kugel pfeift, Trompeten tönen, bin ich zu Haus. Mit Kanonen Donner und Musik, die Schlacht verkünden, lacht mir das Herz. Ich lob mir die Waffen, ich lob mir das Leben des wandernden, fröhlichen Kriegers.
Well, probably Karl Günther, who was Wagner's colleague for 2 seasons in Riga while Wagner was working here, probably he really influenced the fact that in 1843 The Flying Dutchman by Wagner was produced, and Karl Günther was in the leading role in this opera. And to really understand how this singer could, as a personality, perform Wandering Dutchman or Flying Dutchman, perhaps is can be explained by what I said before, that he interpreted his roles in a very dramatic way, and also he had very extensive repertoire. But quite soon after this production, he left Riga and continued working in German theaters. The next personality whom I would like to mention, and who was also very much interested in producing The Flying Dutchman in Riga, that was Johann Hoffmann. He was also one of the persons who was working together with Wagner. He had been singing both in opera theater in Vienna and in Berlin, and in mid-1830s he left for St. Petersburg, and then on his way back he stopped in Riga for some performances, but he actually were persuaded together with his wife to stay here, and they were engaged by Riga City Theatre. And here we see again a billboard in which again both Hoffmanns are really highlighted in the billboard as the visiting performers. And the following has been written about Hoffman, that he had become very much beloved as a singer because he combined very apt and live performance with very good musical education and excellent singing manner. Hoffman sang Max, Othello, Siboy, Joseph, and his wife played Desdemona, Norma. That was that was uh, that was very important for Riga theatre, and Johann was also a director of operas. There's one more quote about Fidelio performed by Katharina Madeleine Hoffmann. It was mentioned that her performance had been excellent because especially in higher registers her voice had been very pure and harmonious. All these operas in Riga were conducted by Wagner. When in 1839 theatre director Karl von Holte uh, discontinued agreement with the theatre because his beloved wife had died and he returned to Germany, Johann Hoffmann was chosen as the next director of the theatre, and he, as a director of theatre, included the Flying Dutchman in the repertoire of this theatre. If I could characterize Hoffmann as a managing director of the theatre, I have to say that he was able to appreciate excellence, and he also paid appropriate royalties to the singers, which were unimaginable for Riga at the time. Karl Ginter received 2,500 rubles per year, later 3,000. Of course, this does not mean anything at us today. But if we compare, according to Riga Theatre Committee plans, in 1837 the whole budget for salaries of the orchestra was 6,000 rubles, and Wagner's salary in Riga was 800 rubles. Johannes Hoffmann brought great performances to Riga as a managing director, as a director, and as an opera singer, but he also caused great financial losses, and so in 1844 he bid farewell to Riga. And here I would like to quote one poet which has been translated into Latvian by Valdis Bisenieks. It was published in the Riga newspaper, and it was written by one of Riga poets. And it's a dedication to his friends upon leaving Riga stage on the 30th of June 1844. And in general, this poem states that we heard your heart in the performance, and you brought it to the heights of the art, and we still keep hearing the divine harmony of voices. But now the curtain has fallen, and we are again back in the north. And we no longer have you who brought the brilliance of art upon us. Well, and this poet continues, the romantic poet continues, but the whole idea is clear. People in Riga appreciated Hoffmann's talent and his artistic achievements. Then I have to mention another person, Heinrich Dorn, who also was together with Wagner in Riga. He also left Riga approximately at the time when Hoffmann's family left. And when Wagner arrived in Riga in 1837, he was a musical director. In Riga, he was conducting amateur and professional symphony concerts. He was also organizing extensive musical festivals, Duene Musikfest, like the Daugava Musical Festival. He was not very interested in the theater. He had large family, but his wife were on friendly terms with Minna, wife of Richard Wagner. In 1838, that was the beginning of the second season of Wagner in Riga. Wagner produced Dorn's opera, The Judge of Paris, and symbolically he gave the possibility to conduct this opera to the composer himself. Heinrich Dorn also in his memoirs, Aus meinem Leben, describes very vividly musical soirees in Wagner's apartment. And he remembers that we were listening the first sketches of Rienzi, And Wagner had planned Adriano role for Miss Planner, his sister-in-law, and she had to sing all the women's parts. But the arias of the gentlemen were sung by all of them, but mainly Karl von Lutzaus. But in this suburb, Russian suburb, Russians stopped in horror because they heard those hellish noises upstairs, and later even the strings of grand piano snapped. And that's why this awful noise was created. But in beginning of spring 1839, the first two acts of Rienzi were close to completion. But as you all know, relationships between Wagner and Don in 1839 changed. That was after Karl von Holte secretly signed an agreement with Don, who had to replace Wagner as the chapel master in autumn of 1839. But this is not the story for today. Here I speak about the time when the both composers were good colleagues on friendly terms. Wagner conducted Dorn's opera, and in 1843 Dorn in turn conducted The Flying Dutchman. Karl von Lutzow, the cello player, was also very actively engaged in musical life. And again, we see one playbill just 1 year before Wagner arrived in Riga. But in general, we are interested in all members of the orchestra. This is from 1837 in the Riga City Theatre Almanac. And here we see, as members of the theatre, Franz Engelin, violinist, contrabass player Ferdinand August Ulrich, oboist Ludwig Kunz, flute player von Rutkowski, bassoonist Mertke, and others. But definitely at the time, the arrival of the new concertmaster Karl Lotz attracted attention. He started working together with Wagner in the autumn of 1837. And a year later, when Karl Lotze was playing Berio violin concerto, Riga Press wrote that his performance had been soft, nice, but also very strong, and the audience had clapped after each part of this musical piece. But also I have to say a couple of words about Karl von Holte, who engaged Richard Wagner. The question is, were they friends? Definitely not, because they had radically different views on the stage art. But in 1839, when von Holte's wife Julia deceased, he dedicated a special song to her, Gesang am Grabe von Julius von Holte, and the lyrics were composed also by one poet from Riga, Harald von Brackel. The period in Riga was very important for the development of Wagner's personality. Perhaps he was not aware of it, but he was greatly influenced by Riga musical environment, because Riga City Theatre at the time really purchased the most recent opera music, Italian and German, and he could produce these operas on the basis of his extensive knowledge. He was also developing his own style of composing. He was influenced also by his contacts with theatre soloists and musicians. And some of them were his friends, and others were just good colleagues. But in general, in Riga, among the musicians, he's had very different personalities, very different people, and also with very different musical abilities and different talents. And now, in conclusion, I would offer to listen to one more fragment of music. And I believe this fits really very well. In this, we listened to his first piece composed here in Riga, that he was composed as an additional piece to an opera. But in conclusion, I would like you to listen to the music to understand what Wagner was like when he left Riga. That's a very brief fragment from Rienzi, overture, where I really hear everything that Wagner had cherished and developed here in Riga. His striving ahead, his master, his skill, his mastery, and his moving towards major European theaters.
Paldies, paldies, Ilona.
Thank you, Madam Brege. Unfortunately, I have to carelessly say now, because of the tight agenda that we have, you can ask your questions now only if you can't hold them back. It seems that my carelessness has been justified, but as Ilona said, go to the literature, go to the sources there, you will find all the missing information that you didn't hear today from the stage. Before the coffee break, we will also have Ilmaz Dirvek's insight into the history of the building on the Wagner Street 4. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, in order to better comprehend where we are today in a very complex mixture of buildings and rooms, I will try to briefly walk you through the history of this building, where, what, why happened, which buildings were built and how they were transformed over various periods, and my information is mostly based on the research that I'd conducted in 2018 when I researched the architecture and the history of this building from an artistic perspective in order to get some kind of a feel or some kind of understanding what we are dealing with here in terms of this building and its past, its history, and the way it's been documented. So it was built in late 16th century, early 17th century, when a new city developed between the city walls, the reinforcement around the city. First buildings appeared on the right bank of the Riga River next to the medieval reinforcement wall, and then later on the other side in the 1650 we already see the quarters where you can see Wagner Street and Glasnodai Street and Moceniek Street. In 1677, plan, we already see clusters of buildings, but very little is known about these clusters of buildings because two major fires broke out in 1677, 1689, and destroying most of these buildings of those clusters, and some sort of a normal evolution of the built-up area began only after the Northern War. So where we are currently located in 59 we had streets, we had a residential building, we also had a warehouse building and a side building through which you could access the now Glasnodar Street. 1762 Otto von Fittinghoff built his house, his manor here next to the Kailtu and Jenny Street corner. And Fittinghoff bought this parcel in 79 with all the structures on it. The building on the Chase Street was no longer there. Then he built a clubhouse and a theatre house, and he decided to invite a well-known architect, very popular and talented Riga chief architect Christoph Haberlin, with whom Fittinghoff had already collaborated on other projects. In 1782, on 15th of September, the new building was revealed and opened its doors to the public, and there was a three-story building, clubhouse built along the street. There was a mezzanine floor between the second and the third floor with a low ceiling. On the northern perimeter, there was a very narrow building built with very low height that we saw as we came along here, and there was a yard with a cross building for the theatre. This is the building in which we are in at the moment. We are currently in the dance hall of the building, which was linked to other third story buildings, and theatre and dance hall was built where the warehouse used to be in former times, but it was of course underwent a lot of retrofitting, because it is mentioned in the documents of the early 18th century, and you could access it through the gate from the Tjeninge Street or Wagner Street, or through the gate that you can see on this right-hand side, and you could also go to the Glasnodar Street through the side exit, and there were stables for 2 horses and for the cars, and also a smaller shed for the animal feed. However, these low mezzanine floors did not match the purpose and were not really used, but it was what Haberland preferred to create for artistic purposes in other buildings. He also used similar either round or round-shaped windows that you can see in Jelgava, Suntaji, Jakova, Volga churches on Wagner Street 21, former city library, and Dome Monastery. Not always these small windows really give light to mezzanine floor. It can also be additional source of lighting for rooms that have higher ceiling. And it was a good solution for the gate from the Tjeninge Street, which was probably 1.5 stories high. Here we can see some of the elements of the building that had to be unearthed in order to understand where the gate was located. So from the theatre and club building built in 18th, 19th century, there's very little left over that we can actually witness today. This is the late 18th century fireplace that was built here later. He's painted it an awful red color, but initially it was white and glazed paint color that was used for tile fireplace. It was initially here are the roof structures. Since the theatre and the dance hall operated independently, they needed rooms to store costumes and other stage design elements and for the actors, and they used the attic for this purpose, and the attic was even divided into 2 levels, which you can see also by the windows that you can see at the top of this top section of this building. And it used to be a wooden staircase that you could use to access the Mus Society theatre rooms and theatre balcony, apart from the side seats in the theatre hall. Also galleries alongside. Despite radical transformations that have gone on, we have also some evidence of the initial shape and the layout of the theatre hall, and here you can see the excavations of the corridor leading from the staircase to the theatre hall. You can see what kind of constructive elements were used to secure the balcony, reinforce the balcony, but there are only some evidence that you can collect in such a drastic manner. So there was a dance hall above the theatre hall. Initially it had rounded sides that we detected through the shape of the windows, and in 1791 there were mirrors used like today, procured from the Hamburg glass mirror factory. In 1787, Musse Society was founded, time to relax the translation, with around 200 members, and all the events and masquerades were organized by the society from now on. In 1789, it was suggested that for the convenience of the visitors, another entrance should be created from the street side with next to this second window sill, which used to belong to the Musse Society. However, not much later, in the first decades of the 19th century, the second exit was relocated further away to the side of the facade. In 1799, the wall painting and the windowsill painting was restored in the Musse Society, and a better maintenance plan was devised. One of the approaches was rather radical. It was forbidden to smoke. It's interesting how they enforced this ban, nevertheless, at the time. And there was another ban to protect the wooden floor tiles. You were prohibited to dance as an officer in your boots, only shoes. In 28th of November 1799, after a celebration, a rumor started spreading that the floor has caved in, and the main architect was ordered to inspect the premises. 2 days later, he reported that there's no danger and the building is safe, which is an obvious conflict of interest from today's perspective. And Haberle had to actually criticize his own creation, and he was, of course, not impartial. In 1810, in different publications, we can see an article about the theatre claiming that everyone who comes into the theatre is suppressed by the poverty that the architecture here presents, and people very quickly get tired of the atmosphere, and if it weren't for the seat backs, you would feel very inconvenient. In case of a fire, you wouldn't find an exit. 19th century witness accounts give information about the cold and moisture here in the building, and Singer Kullenbauer even wrote that a stinging wind was raining on the stage, and almost all the actors lost their voices and had mild cold. Some of the singers lost their voice forever, and it is probably because of the cold underground levels that were blown through, and these deficiencies led to an idea of creating a new theatre, but there was no money in either location for the theatre. In 1829, dance hall became the place for the celebration of marriage ceremonies with more than 100 guests, and in theatre hall the performances were staged. It was very difficult to imagine how both of those events sort of coincided, and one of the beams broke, which led to another examination or inspection, and it turned out that a lot of floor beams are partially damaged and have begun to bend, and that is, of course, an unfortunate consequence of architect Haberle's conviction that there are no problems 30 years ago. His inspection concluded that, in fact, it was in an unusable condition, had to be closed, and all the events had to be switched to the Malgavir house, and it was restored later on in 1829. July early when there were no other events in this hall, when there were receptions held here, there were special means used to reinforce those ceilings, and it meant that the theatre building was outdated, and theatre had to move to more modern premises, and the crop reserve funding was funneled into these needs in 1830 during the cholera. Smoking was allowed again because it was thought that the smoke will not allow the virus to circulate, and children weren't even allowed to breathe second-hand smoke because it was considered that the cholera can be stopped that way, and the smoking ban was nevertheless reintroduced in 1831. Only 1 year later, in 1832, after a vote, it was the restriction or the ban on dancing in the booths was lifted. In 1837, before the 50th anniversary of the Musser Society, finally a bigger reconstruction took place, and we have also documented news about the interior of the theatre hall. So there was red drapery on the seats, and the seat backs were replushed, and there were golden elements used against the red drapery, and this is a very typical sight in any theatre of the 19th century. And pig iron pillars were erected or installed to strengthen the ceiling and the floor, and they were covered in lacquer, and they gleamed like posh columns. In 1837, a theatre playbook with the reconstructed theatre's plan, which is the oldest plan of such kind in Riga, allowed us to visualize the way theatre looked, and there's also a description from the 1830, and we used to have the standing wood tiles all across the floor of the hall, separated by the wooden balustrade. And in front of the stage you had a 1.2 meter deep pit, and then you had the amphitheater with numbered seats, and also behind the party you had unnumbered seats without the back seats. The one was for those who subscribed to the theatre, the other one was for the regular visitors. On the sides you had special lodges, and a corridor adjacent to them. In the end of August 1937, repairs were finalized, and in September the theatre opened its doors. So that's the way the theatre operated from 1837 to 1839, when Richard Wagner worked here as the conductor. He was inspired by the Riga theatre premises, which he recognized in one of the interviews that when he commented the construction Bay Area theatre, there was a slope downwards towards the amphitheatre seating, and the hall was plunged into darkness, and there was an orchestra pit, which was all novelties for the theatres back at the time. In 1863, the theatre period ended here, and Richard Wagner's presence was felt here in the attic. Parts of the wooden floor tiles and wood wall panels could be found, and some of those were probably the ones that Wagner walked across, and these staircases were the fire places that were brought in here were typical to the time.
1863 is the time when the theatre stopped functioning here. It moved to the new building, the opera, and to the opera theatre. And the decision was taken in a very pragmatic way to turn this hall into a warehouse. But at the time, this hall continued to exist. And these 6 windows of the dance hall had red silk curtains and 5 mirrors with tables were located between windows, just like today. 2 large mirrors at the end of the hall, of 4 rounded and 8 Turkish sofas, 12 mahogany and 60 ordinary chairs. In 1866, it was decided to create better and lighter premises for the reading room and library of the association. But it was in a very bad, this whole building, the block was in a very bad technical condition. And so this whole new part where we enter the building and come up to the concert hall was rebuilt. The whole volume was made broader and higher. Important structural changes were introduced when new staircase was built. It's in 1866, this staircase. The older yard block was demolished, and here we see now this new structure we have already have accepted as the historical one. And from the reconstruction of the time, we can mention, for example, this fireplace, which was moved to this site at the time. And in 1877, radical changes to the theater hall began in order to rent it out as a warehouse. This very complicated construction of support had to be demolished that was below the theater floor, and iron beams were installed. These were commissioned at Felser's factory, and the cast iron posts were resold to Paul's factory for reprocessing. And then a new floor was laid into the dance hall. In 1887, again, changes were introduced to the house. On the street side, 2 stores were arranged, and those oval windows were broadened to make those premises lighter. And so the facades that we seen today was created at the time. Here we see in documents the situation before and after the reconstruction. And again, looking for, here we see the work done to find the original entrance. And so, and also here work done to look for original Haberland's oval windows. In 1893, this was completed with holders for banners, and also coat of arms of the association. These were placed on the facade. In 1902, architect Reinberg changed the dance hall, placing moving the place for musicians, the balcony at the end of the hall and not in the beginning. And also ventilation channels were built in. All in all, Reinberg's really changed these classicism forms into very rich neoclassicist decorations that we still see today in this hall. In 1910 and 11, again, architect Boxslavs made the design, and again, reconstruction began. Also, now the reading rooms were moved to the side of the street, and that was achieved by building special annex with a hall. And we see as a result, we see those in 1910 and 11, the interior was made richer and richer. New elements of neoclassicism were inbuilt. Again, this stove, which from the period which are still found in the building, and also some wallpaper samples. It's quite interesting that in 1916, during war times, this was used for war hospital, but later also for some time as premises where Muslim services were held. They could have been held in this very hall. At the beginning of 1920s, garage for approximately 50 cars had been installed on the ground floor, and office buildings and 3 living rooms were on the first floor. In 1935, architect Boxslav wrote that happily the reconstructions of later reconstructions have not affected the main story, the third one, where we still see the very expressive architectural forms. Now everything is being dominated by architecture of boulevards of Paris, pushing everything else into the background. All the reconstructions of 1930s left also some neoclassicism forms, and quite often these premises are used for filming. From 1945, this building was used for the State Historical Library, the former Riga City Library, and on the first floor, safe premises for keeping rare books were installed. And here again, we see this is quite unique fact. These doors that we see, these metal doors for the safe, which was moved from to this building from the Riga City Council building that burned down during the war, and this is actually the only element still preserved from that building. In 1949, and again, this building is adapted to the needs of a library. And here we see again many local reconstructions. For example, in 1950, in the former part of the theater, collection, the storage rooms for books on 3 floors were built. And so again, cracks appeared in the walls. Probably you noticed them when coming up, and the building started to settle, to sink. And this will be the greatest challenge really for those who are going to restore this building, because these cracks have been now monitored for 30 years. It's almost like a museum. In 1988, the higher story was restored, and the dance hall was adapted for chamber music concerts, and it was given the title Wagner's Hall. And it was restored in the image of 1902. New crystal chandeliers and brass lanterns were produced by Lithuanian specialists, but unfortunately at the time no detailed studies were made. And in the premises below us, again, rehearsal premises were set up for professional dance group Daile. In 1994, restaurant was set up in this block D, and in 1998, the yard was covered with a glass roof to install the restaurant. But in 2007, the technical condition of the building was so bad that concerts no longer were held, and by 2011 also other users of the building left it. The building, as we see it today at number 4 Wagner Street, has reached today after numerous and quite radical reconstructions. That's why in the architecture that we see, the image of the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century dominates, and we also have more information about it. And the initial features of classicism created by Haberland, we only see in the upper part of the building, in the facade. So it's very important also that during restoration of the building, all these studies and research should be continued so that we would obtain more additional information about historical development of different parts of the building, including the theater hall. And I wish the best of luck to those who are going to restore this building. Thank you. Now the time has come for us that we could announce both break for refreshments and break for questions and answers if we come back here at 1:15. So we reconvene at 1:15 and we have break for refreshments.
Sveicināti!
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the conference marking the 240th anniversary of Riga City Theatre. I hope you used the break to informally discuss the questions that you wanted to probably ask here but didn't have a chance to. Before we go over to our speeches by Gail and Lolita Furman, I would like to give the floor to the president of the International Association of Wagner Societies, Herbert Fineske.
Ich freue mich, dass ihr alle so schön vertreten seid. Wunderbar. Meine Damen und Herren, Maris, Frau Geile, sagen, dass wir als Wagner-Verband international sehr stolz auf dieses Projekt sind. Wir alleine hätten das niemals geschafft, obwohl wir weltweit 125 Verbände sind, die ich repräsentieren darf. 45 davon allein in Deutschland. Ihr seht in Riga, in Tallinn, in Tartu, in Turku. Es gibt überall, auch in Osteuropa, Wagner-Verbände, sogar in Petersburg und Moskau. Und 3 Verbände in der Ukraine, die wir sogar dieses Jahr als Stipendiaten in Bayreuth begrüßen durften. Und ich möchte mich sehr, sehr herzlich bei Maris bedanken, vor allem, dass er dieses großartige Projekt angestoßen, gefördert und weiter begleiten wird mit den Architekten, mit dem ganzen Arbeitsteam, was dazugehört. Es ist eine Riesenaufgabe und die Vorträge bis jetzt haben mich so begeistert, dass ich mir das nicht hätte vorstellen können, was hier für ein Projekt in Gange gebracht wird nach 240 Jahren nach der Gründung dieses Hauses durch die Familie Vietinghoff. Ganz herzlichen Dank dafür. Und wir werden natürlich alles weiter tun. Viele Verbände haben schon Spenden gemacht für das Theater, für verschiedene gezielte Projekte. Auch darauf sind wir natürlich sehr stolz. Und das Haus, wenn es fertig ist, ist das Schöne, dass es nicht ein neues regionales Theater wird wie überall, sondern es wird eine internationale Begegnungsstätte werden für Musik, für die Kultur, für Gesang, für das Zusammentreffen europäischer Künstler, Musiker, auch Manager, die dazugehören. Und es wird ein großer Teil der authentischen Orte Richard Wagners und seines Schaffens, die wir noch haben. Das Epizentrum, Sie wissen alle, ist natürlich Bayreuth. Aber wir haben Venedig, seinen Sterbeort mit dem Palazzo Vendramin und dem Palazzo Giustiziano, dort, wo der Tristan entstanden ist. Und wir haben Triebschen, wo er einige Jahre gelebt hat, auf Kosten des König Ludwigs, der die Miete dort finanziert hat. Und so entsteht in Riga ein nächster authentischer Ort, für den ich sehr dankbar bin. Und ich werde das auf unserer Website und den Verbänden bringen. Und ich bin dankbar, dass ich heute dabei sein darf. Vielen Dank an Sie alle. Danke sehr. Moment, bevor ich es vergesse. Aber er ist so unscheinbar da hinten. Der Ururenkel Richard Wagners, Antoine Wagner. Ich begrüße dich ganz herzlich in unserer Mitte. Er ist auch für Eva, seine Mutter, da. Schön, dass du da bist. Danke.
Paldies, Fineske.
Thank you, Mr. Fineske. Now, we will hear from Zyga Gail about the authenticity of the building where Richard Wagner used to work. My presentation, my story will consist of 2 parts. One is a personal account of how I and my husband, Maris Gailis, arrived at the idea of reconstructing Wagner Theatre and how we became part of the Wagner Society. This is the facade that had been shown to you a number of times already today, and this is the Haberlands facade. Vietinghoff. Today I actually saw his portrait for the first time, painted portrait. So Riga City Theatre is very much created by 3 outstanding Germans, 3 patrons, 3 key figures for the theatre, with who have also determined our relationship with Germany, the restoration of the cultural relationship between Latvia and Germany, also in terms of cultural ties. Hamilton was an architect who was educated in Germany and returned to Riga to become a very prominent architect in Riga. And Wagner, 34 years old, just married a Minna, and who lived here for 2 years. So three major German figures who contributed a lot to the development of the Latvian culture, now national culture. So this is a bird's eye view of the Wagner house. Wagner Theatre is like a hidden gem. Those people, you know, those German tourists that come to the facade of the Wagner Theatre from the Wagner Street side, they see they first see this facade, they are led into the building, they go through the corridors, they reach the 3rd floor, but it's not really clear where the theatre used to be, and the theatre has actually been hidden, and new buildings have been built in front, so that everyone thinks that the music hall is the part of the theatre, but that's not right. It's only one of the rooms of the Wagner Theatre, and this is another bird's eye view of the rusty rooftops. It's interesting that this theatre, which faces the Wagner Street, it can also be accessed from the other side, from the Wagner Street, from the other side of this quarter. So there's another exit or entrance, or it protrudes to the other side of the quarter. So Wagner Street is over there, and Glasnotai Street is to the right. So a theatre building should be located at this yellow volume, because it can be accessed from 3 sides, not only from the front, from the street. So Musa Hall, and now my personal account of the time when Riga First Theatre used to house Fundamental Library. After the war, when theatre was repurposed into a war hospital and a place from where the repatriation of Germans was coordinated, and then theatre came to these buildings. But my uncle Jan was the director of the Fundamental Library, and we remember, you know, piles of books in his home, at home, because after the war, when a lot of people left or escaped and fled to the west through Germany, or were deported to Siberia, many people held their things in their flats, in their Riga flats, and my uncle actually made this collection out of the books that he retrieved from different flats of Riga, from different people, and the reading rooms were on this floor, actually, on this level. And the hall, which used to be Wagner's Theatre Hall, it was actually blocked at the turn of the century. We, on 3rd levels, have the book storage, or this book collection, and the fact that the Wagner Theatre was filled with books is a wonderful story, and it was nice that not some kind of warehouse function was designated to this hall, but rather stored or housed books. And there's this small adjacent room. As you remember, there was an entrance from the town hall side, this little room which was hidden behind the stairs, this mezzanine room. It's very cold. And in this room, behind the steel doors of the town hall, you could find a rare book collection, so those rare books that were retrieved from the burning town hall house. They were wheeled using the carts into the Wagner house and hidden behind the stairs in a hidden compartment, in a way. Another interesting nuance. This is the hall of the Wagner Theatre, one of the levels of this theatre section, and as has already been mentioned, this was the place where the dance collective style rehearsed, and it has brooches. And for our guests from Germany, by the way, during the Soviet time, just for your information, during the Soviet times, so national folk sort of symbols and arts were supported by the Soviet rule, but they were very closely somewhat intertwined with the communist ideology, and so those brooches from the Soviet times are a modern day Valkyries, I would call them. They sort of meant a good thing, but actually were dreadful. And this is an image from when we started working on the Wagner theatre project some 5 years ago, or probably more. I was invited to the Wagner Society founding event. Society was founded by Iman Sklotić. He's in this room today. He's among us today. Several musical historians came together. I was invited as an architect, and we, started discussing about how wonderful it would be to have the Wagner Theatre, a hall restored. It was just, nice sort of daydreaming, or, dreaming of what might happen. Our government didn't have any money for the restoration of the Wagner Theatre. It wasn't one of the budget priorities or priority projects in our budget. But then one day on Saturday, when we hosted Gentlemen's Club at our home, Maris Giles had established a Gentlemen's Club. So gentlemen came, they were talking, and they were sitting there. And when they left, I told Maris, you keep on, talking about all sorts of things. So why wouldn't you choose a project to support and promote? Why couldn't it be a Wagner Hall project, for example? Because we had recently completed the Janis Lipke Museum in Uppsala, and as when it comes to the Lipke Museum, we actually started from scratch. 3 people came together: August Sukuts, Viktor Jansons, and Maris Giles, and we learned who Aris Lipke is, and we gathered donations to build the Lipke Museum, which is very successful, by the way, in Uppsala, and we're already starting our work on the second building for the museum. And the museum is an interesting venue where discussions, meetings are taking place, theatre plays are being staged, poetry readings are being held, and we have bought an adjacent land lot and are currently working on the second phase development of the theatre building complex. And so we started dreaming with Mars, Maybe it's not all about money. We should, make our dreams possible even without money, that it's not always money that needs to be found to implement your dreams. And then we approached Andrzej Żagars, and he gave us tickets to Bayreuth Theatre. And 5 years ago, we met Eva Wagner for the first time. Eva, Madam Wagner was in her last year being the director at the Bayreuth Theatre. She was then succeeded by her half-sister, and Eva left Bayreuth with, quite bitter feelings. And when we came to her room, she brought us to the orchestra right away, and she said, this is probably the solace and probably the sort of the project that will keep me going, because we'll have a real project to work on. And we started working on the Wagner Theatre project for the project of the theatre, where Wagner worked for 2 years. This is how we started our road to Bundestag, and we went to Bundestag. Was it 2 years ago, where we finally received by the members of the Bundestag? That's when we presented the idea about this theatre, our initial ideas, and then Maris, created the Wagner Society, Riga Wagner Society. And then we were invited to visit Bundestag, and this is an image from us in the Bundestag with a member of the parliament, Karl, to whom we owe a lot. It was a German-Baltic cooperation group leader and the financier And when we were invited to the Bundestag, we decided that we need to bring something together with us instead of just stories about how wonderful it would be to restore this theatre. And then we started thinking, we came up with different drawings or the blueprints even, and we even created a mock or a model of the theatre. This is the night before going, us trying to complete this model or the mock model, so we should put it in the camera obscura to bring it to Germany, and we made a custom suitcase that could be opened from any side and with lights, and when you open this, camera obscura, Rinzi overture began playing, so we played this Rinzi overture at the Bundestag, and they gave us 5 million. A big thank you to the German government, by the way, here, and they've agreed to become a patroness of the project right away. She'd annually visited Riga to take part in our Wagner's birthday celebration events in May. And this is another patron of the Wagner House, our president, Egils Levits, the president of the Republic of Latvia, Egils Levits. This is an image from Munich, when President visited Munich. And he kindly agreed to bring our black box to other Wagner enthusiasts, and this is a picture of us and Egils Levits and the Latvian delegation, like small children just enjoying this model of the dollhouse, as we called it. And this is, of course, a lot later. This is another event. Do you know whom you can see here? It's Gideon Kramer and Mikhail Baryshnikov. In fact, I have a joint project with Mikhail Baryshnikov right now. We are building a house for him as well in Riga, and he comes to Riga on a regular basis. And one day, by the way, he came to Riga, and we were meeting Gideon Kramer that day, and for more than a year, Gideon Kramer was rehearsing, or basically lived Kremerata Baltica, Kremerata Latonica, lived in the Wagner house. So two schoolmates actually met at the Wagner house, and Gideon greeted Misha by saying, welcome to my house or home. And there were rehearsal rooms before that, and the office was here. And Kremerata, by the way, rehearses here to this day. They are not school classmates, of course. They are schoolmates. Gideon was a classmate of the Mikhail Maisky, and Mikhail Baryshnikov was 2 years away from him or 2 years down from him. I'm not really sure, but they were, schoolmates. It just goes to show, how strong musical education and traditions are in Latvia, how steeple we are in this tradition. And we went on Saturday to Kremerata concert, and yesterday we had the pleasure of enjoying Mr. Osokin, Dmitry Osokin. Tonight we'll listen to Andrei Osokin. Nevertheless, with Wagner in mind, we have a garden party every summer, Wagner-themed garden party to collect the donations. We also have a little concert in our backyard as well. And 2 years ago, we thought, what should we do? And he ordered or commissioned a Wagner sculpture made of ice. So this is the Wagner ice sculpture. He was slowly melting. And children, and slowly turned children into Wagner enthusiasts and lovers. This is an auspicious moment, an auspicious event when on stage of the Wagner House, the President of the Republic of Latvia, Mr. Egils Levits, Mayor of Riga, and the manager of the National Real Estate Agency sign the agreement on transferring of the building to the Riga Wagner Society. For you to, understand, this is again from my personal experience, this is my personal account here. When Maris went to our Minister of Finance, he said, just, let us be, we don't have any money, and we have the acoustic concert hall. And Maris and he said to Mars, you know, just take the building and do whatever you want with it. And actually, for the first time in the history of restored, of newly independent Latvia, this was the first time when a government building, a state-owned building, was transferred to a private society, making us fully accountable for what happens with the building. And several times we brought our black box to our parliament to convince the parliamentarians to adopt a new law or agreement or covenant, basically, you know, recognizing our right to manage the building as a private society, which also comes with enormous accountability, which is a big responsibility. And this is an image where you can see the German federal president visiting the Wagner house. Everyone's wearing a face mask, of course, but German president is our third patron, the third patron of this project. So we have the Latvian, the German president, and Eva Wagner as patrons of this project. This is Kremerata playing for the federal president of Germany. And this is President Steinmeier looking at the wooden tiles, wooden floor tiles. Ilmaz Drivek showed you some of the remnants of the wooden floor tiles hidden in the attic, but we took off the linoleum and we unveiled a very posh mosaic floor tiles made of wood. It's unbelievable. Those small wooden pieces have suffered a lot. A lot of boots have walked over it, and you know, if they are damaged by the boots dancing people, then you just, you know, put another layer upon it. So we have wonderful floor tiles on this level, and this is the next miraculous moment when it comes to Wagner theatre. When theatre was discontinued, when it was closed, when opera building or the German theatre was completed, apparently as they moved out of the building, they didn't have anywhere to store the sheet music and instruments, because there was a car dealership and shops on the first level. There's commercial function on the first level, but when the opera was restored, it turned out that all of its archives and all of its collection is on the first balcony beneath the floor tiles in a ventilation shaft. So these archives that had already become legendary by the time, with all the sheet music, were handed over to the State Archive of Latvia because they didn't have the resources to analyze or research this material. But luckily enough, some 3 years later, archives were handed over to the National Library of Latvia, which had researchers that worked on analyzing these materials for 3 years. And Elon Brede also talked about a lot of things that were uncovered during this analysis. And when we started working on this building, we thought we should have a Wagner museum here, but we had no, you know, exhibits for that. We just had the chicken, which is, you know, I doubt of much value. But now we have sheet music, and we also have concert advertisements and playbooks and sheet music. And in archives we found sheet music of all the orchestral sections, quite an extensive material with side notes of stage designers or conductors, I don't know really, but all of these items will be exhibited here. All of them are authentic and come from the times of the theatre when it was actually operational. Now, about the attic. I mean, these halls are very well preserved, and their wooden elements are very well preserved, and the attic is very high, very spacious, and has been used to store stage design elements, some cranes, and there were flats there as well. Do you know who lives there now? It's an eagle, actually. How did eagle end up in the city centre, in the very heart of a city? Well, that's a mystery. We think it's Wagner's spirit, actually, that continues to keep an eye through this eagle on the building. On one side of the attic you have pigeons, and on the other side you have eagle living there. He doesn't live there permanently. He comes in every other day. He was found by the guys who restored the wooden floor tiles. They just had them dismounted, and they saw the eagle flying in just for lunch. He ate a couple of pigeons and flew away. Now, as regards to the reconstruction plan, we are perfectly located at the heart of Riga. You can see the Freedom Monument at the right top side, National Opera, Culture Street, and you can access the theatre from 3 different sides, and this is the plan of the theatre, and I would like to briefly walk you through it, but I can't unfortunately find the pointer.
Here we see the plan of the theater. This is the ground floor, the ground level. Well, theater is very complicated. To reach the main halls, you have to walk from Wagner Street through the yard on the left side. But we have all this enfilade of premises around the yard, and we had to find some kind of way how to split it all for different stories and organize it. This is the basement, then we have the ground floor, the ground level. In the basement, we would organize cloakrooms and toilets. The land is too valuable to use so all those service premises and warehouses, everything will be in the lower ground floor. And whenever we work there, we find new premises. The original lower ground floor is on the left side, but on the right side we have again discovered some new premises. And so this is the first floor, and here again we see how these premises are arranged in enfilade, and you can walk through all of them and round, and we have to understand what to do. This is now the floor that we are on, Musse Hall, and then the 4th floor, the attic, and then the 5th, and you now see this building in a cross section. And I will now move back, and I will speak about different functions. We are really digging into the underground very seriously. So we are using all the premises available. The ground floor is for the public. The first one with lower ceilings is the creative one. The second is Musse Club. And the third one, that would be for master classes, workshops, and also student residences. And here in this cross section, you see Wagner Theatre. We are now up here. You see Musse Hall. We are on that level. And here below the floor is the Wagner Theatre Hall. It occupies 3 levels. We will dig slightly into the underground to improve acoustics of the hall. And actually, also thanks to Ambassador of Japan, Toyota has agreed to work with us. So this is the best acoustic master in the world. Eva Wagner already told us at the time, she promised we will get Toyota work for him, and Toyota has consented. And here we see it from above. This model, we see that the yard will be covered by a grass roof, and at the end of it, we will have this cone, Wagner's cone, and this will dominate in the yard, it will be panoramic elevator. And here again, we see the building from above, the facade. This is the view outgoing to the yard up to the roof. Roof will be in glass, and we see also this elevator. So this will allow people to find bearings in this premise. And here we see the hall. Wagner's hall will have the stall, the stages, the orchestra bed, and this is the model that we have made. And we are trying to reconstruct according to the descriptions how this hall might have looked like. As it was characterized once, that architecture had been very simple, very light colors, green colors, red colors, a bit of gold, and boxes were draped in red. And here in this picture we can see how we get actually 3 halls by restoring this building. Theater hall, which is almost for 500 buildings, that will be a repertoire theater. Then Musse hall, which will be for chamber music concerts. And this whole level will be intended also for renting out. We will be able to earn money. Hiefenhofs were also earning money. And then the attic hall, that will be a wonderful space to be used for exhibition, for concerts, for different events that can be held up there. Now about the facade. Ilmars Dirveiks also was speaking about the building. This is Haberland's facade. He drew it as a theater. We have at the very center 2 gates with upper lights, and horse carriages were drawn, went through the gates, and the members of the public stepped out of the coaches, and the coaches left along Gaznotāju Street. And from this original facade, we only have left this Musse level. The first and the second level, these were reconstructed when stores were arranged there, and as in Paris. And in the attic floor, apartments were installed and windows were enlarged. Now we have the current facade looks like this, and it looks really different from the original one. And this is the one that we are offering. We really want you to have the feeling when you approach the buildings that you have come to a theater, you have wide entrance, you go into the yard, people are already gathering there. And in this discussion about Haberland's facade and restoring this facade, we have here several researchers of architecture who are very much against it. They believe that each layer of history is important, and even this last one is also as valuable as the previous one. And I asked Imants Landsmanis, the director of Rundale Castle, I asked for his advice. What should we do? Should we restore the Haberland's facade? And Imants Landsmanis wrote a wonderful reply consenting to this. Stating that very few Haberland's buildings have been preserved, they have been reconstructed and demolished. And this letter really helped us a lot. The Council of the Historical Center of Riga, they agreed to restoring this facade. Also, the Board of Cultural Monuments also agreed to this. And now this sketch, this initial design has been approved by all monument institutions dealing with national and municipal cultural monuments. And now we have, this has been done, and now we have to develop our design for buildings project. We have used Bundestag's money and also money that has been donated to us. We also have to thank the local sponsors and those who are buying chairs. Also today you have the opportunity to buy a chair for the hall. We have reached the point that we have already or the competition or the procurement for builders has been completed. The company's Konta Bouv is ready. We have made the calculations and we will send all of these documents to Germany, and German bureaucracy is even more accurate than the Latvian bureaucracy, and Maris and his team, they are really fighting for this. And we are going to set this into motion. When? Well, the answer could not be heard, I'm sorry. Thank you, Zaig Gaile. Anyone wishing to ask a question, but very swift and brief, because we are really behind the agenda and we have the next speaker already coming up. So perhaps we can ask questions later, informally. How are we going to organize our life now? Singing first and speaking afterwards? Lolita, are the choir singers ready to wait a bit? Well, apparently Lolita will arrange it all, and we have the last presentation on Heinrich Dorn, who was already mentioned today, Professor Lolita Fuhrmann. Oh, good afternoon, dear participants of the conference, and those. I will try to improvise. We wanted to have the part of singing at the very end, but artists from Latvian Radio Choir has come, and they have prepared particularly for this event and in connection with my presentation, with my report, and I have helped them, and they have prepared for us two choirs from Heinrich Dorn's opera, an opera which was quite recently discovered in Riga, the English Banner. And these two pieces have been prepared specially for the 240th anniversary of the theatre. So we will start by music and ask the artists to perform.
Tātad mēs dzirdēsim divus korus. Pirmais.
So we will hear two sort of pieces. One is the songs of sailors from the opera, and the second one from Austrian knights. And this is from opera by Heinrich Dorn, English Banner, following 1841. This is now the second performance.
So
We began by music. Well, the intention was to have it at the very conclusion of the event, but perhaps it's quite apt that we heard it at the beginning, because now we have some kind of perception or some kind of impression how Heinrich Dorn sounds. My presentation will be dedicated to the time of 1830s, the time which we have mentioned a lot in connection with Wagner's time, but I will speak about an opera composed in Riga, and we didn't suspect of its existence a couple of years ago. That's opera by German composer Heinrich Dorn, English Banner, in the original Das Banner von England. And it was composed in Riga and was produced here on the 8th of November 1841. But that was according to the old calendar style existing at the time at the Russian Empire. It's an opera based on Walter Scott's romantic novel Talisman. And so the action takes place in Palestine at the end of 1191, at the end of Third Crusade. And the topics of the dignity of fatherland and betrayal is at the center of it. The philosophy of two different worlds, Western and Oriental world. And I would say that this Oriental world is not opened as a buffoonery in a comic way, a playful way, as we often see in the German song, those performances of Germany. But this world is presented as being equal to the Western world, this very humane part of mankind. Until now, we could speak about this opera only in abstract way, but now we see real musical shape appearing, and it brings totally new knowledge about the creative heritage of opera genre in Latvia. 3 years ago, when the Latvian National Library made the catalogue of the sheet music of this Riga city theatre, and I was part of the team. Actually, this is approximately 800 pages long score, manuscript. It's for orchestra voices, and also we have voices, arias and dialogues, and it's all handwritten in Gothic orthography. And it's in the 19th century German language. Let's start by asking who was Heinrich Dorn. We've heard this name being mentioned already several times today, but I have a different picture, not the one that Ilona Brejde was showing to you. What do we know about him, about Wagner's colleague? He was born in Eastern Prussia, Königsberg, in the family of prosperous traders. He started by studying law, but then he turned to music. And his musical education was based on foundations linked to Berlin Singing Academy. But this, in turn, was very closely connected to this new practice, this Liedertafel singing practice of the 19th century. It's important to keep that in mind, because Dorn's life later is very closely linked to this form of making music, Liedertafel, which was very popular in society. And we heard this tradition also in those two musical pieces that we just heard. The interest in Dorn among Latvians is quite obvious, because he spent 11 years of his life in Riga. During this time, Riga saw Dorn as very active leader of music life. He was chapel master of the theater, director of sacral music, and at some point he was even allowed by Riga clergy to combine these two offices. And it's like Cherubini, because he took lunch before the altar, but dined behind the scenes at a theater. Dorn revealed himself in Riga also as a person who was very important as an organizer of Dune Music Fest in Riga, which was very important for the development of the tradition of a song festival. And Dorn's former student, Robert Schumann, is only a couple of weeks after he established his newspaper, Neue Zeitschrift für Musik, he invited him to become correspondent and write for this new publication. When we analyze Dorn's report, we see that this gave the possibility to the author, of course, also to praise his own achievements, because almost all civic institutions of music in Riga were under his responsibility. And yet, whatever was the nature of these publications, these are very important because they provided regular information and reports to the world about music life in Riga. Dorn arrived in Riga in the autumn of 1832. He came from Leipzig, where he had spent 3 years. He was the music director of the Court Theatre of Saxony, and it was a place where he also got acquainted with Richard Wagner, who was 16 years old at the time. Wagner was born in Leipzig, and his elder sister Rosalie was actress at the Leipzig Theatre, and this was another reason which promoted their closer acquaintance. Dorn supported the new talented musician by playing in Leipzig his first overture for orchestra. Perhaps these human contacts also made Wagner inquire about possible office of chapel master in Riga in 1836. Wagner's intention to go to Riga was implemented 1 year later when German actor and writer Karl von Holte became the managing director of Riga Theatre. We also saw his portrait earlier today. He was an outstanding personality. And when he left Riga in mid-19th century, he published in Germany his crime novel, Ein Mord in Riga, so Murder in Riga. And by the way, this book is available also online today. And in this novel, we can find some very nuanced observations also about society and public visiting theaters in Riga.
It was Holte who actually offered Wagner to become the chapelmeister to fill this vacancy, and Dorn's life is best described in his memoirs, published in 7 volumes in 70s and 80s of the 19th century. According to his memoirs, Dorn and Wagner were on very friendly terms initially, although some of his own recollections are very mentorish. For Wagner, Dorn was an older brother. For Dorn, he loved Wagner's piano performances of the what later became Rienzi opera. When in March of 1838, Wagner at the Blackhead's house played monumental vocal instrumental concert, Dorn reviewed the event, gave a very detailed review of the event in the new musical paper. He called the overture Columbus a Beethoven piece of art. Grandeur of ideas is astonishing, and astounding beauty of these ideas are very modern and Bellini-like, and he was compared to Bellini as the top standard for musical composer at the time. And if we look at the review, at the bottom paragraphs of the review, there's some criticism there as well, because according to Dorn, Wagner's instrumental arrangements were too theatrical, too extravagant for him. And as he claimed, Wagner has acted in a very Hegelian manner, like Hegel would do. Under Holte, the Riga City Theatre was modernized under his leadership, and architects very eloquently described that before me, and a huge artistic development took place. One of the Estonian critic Selma Oro, in one of his articles about Riga Wagner House, wrote that in 1838, in the first season of the Holte Theatre, the inhabitants of Riga gave the 14,000 silver rubles grant to the theatre, and according to Arrow, this gave Wagner an opportunity to dream of the Riga City Theatre as more than just a theatre, as a cultural venue, as a cultural hub, as a theatre, as a sacred place, not just a provincial comedy stage. The hall of the theatre is not too luxurious, and the orchestra pit is very, very claustrophobic, as according to Wagner it had only place for first violin, second violin, and counterbass, but as a string quartet, barely enough. But it is also notable that many operas that were staged and produced here in Latvia, and I've gone through the sheet music of these operas that I have researched from the Latvian archives, indicate that the first violin, second violin, and counterbass is the size of the string section in these operas. And it was all aligned with the sort of opera facilities that were available here at the time. And in spring of 1839, because of the conflict with Wagner, the theatre decided to discontinue its cooperation with Wagner, and Dawn was offered to become a stage director and an artistic director of the theatre, which of course drew both musicians apart, and according to Wagner, it was a betrayal for him, it was a betrayal and a coup against him. So he left Riga in 1839, and later on in 1843 Dawn followed him, but on his 30th birthday, on Wagner's 30th birthday, Dawn gave the Flying Dutchman premiere to the Riga music lovers. This production, which was delivered to the audience in Riga to raving reviews, was also criticized by Arrow because of being too instrumental. Nevertheless, Arrow recognized the talent behind the opera, the talent that promised to bring the German music out of the desert and give it to the world. And Wagner's role is important from a number of perspectives. From a perspective of this individual relationship between the two musicians, that although there was a betrayal existed for their life, and Dawn was also the witness of the development of the Wagner Riga opera. And thirdly, and interestingly enough, the Dawn opera, the English banner, which was composed shortly after Wagner leaving Riga, one of the main protagonists was Richard Lionheart, or the Richard Löwenherz in German, and the Queen Berengaria, longing to see her husband awaking from the tremors and nightmares, with the name Richard on his lips. It was a surreal comparison of Dawn Wagner complicated relationship. No matter what's your take on the relationship, one thing is certain: Dawn wasn't just Wagner's satellite, if you will. He was an artist in his own right, a musician in his own right, with his own path and mission. This slide shows a concert advertisement for the Wagner celebration in Riga in 1936. You can see different locations where the events took place. The Riga Square, where Friedrich Schneider's Judgment Day was performed. Beethoven's 7th Symphony was performed in another location in Chesedars, another monumental Beethoven orchestral piece. Wellington's Victory was performed, or the fight by Victoria was performed. Dawn composed 2 operas while in Riga. The first of them was the comedy Judge of Paris, which has already been mentioned, which on February 1st, 1838 was actually directed by Richard Wagner. According to Dawn's memories, Wagner followed the musical purity of this piece. Der studiert hocht sauber ein, is what he said, and sheet music is currently, of this opera, is currently stored in Berlin and Dresden, and this opera hasn't been again researched too thoroughly by the Latvian researchers, unfortunately. Dawn's second Riga opera, the English Banner, on the contrary, was performed only a couple of times and actually disappeared from the sort of radar of the opera researchers. Apart from 2 reviews in the German newspapers such as Der Zuschauer and the Riga Zeitung, there's very little information about this opera, and it was considered to be lost for some time. And now, as you browse through the more recent musical encyclopedia that had been published or released in the recent couple of decades, both in English and German, you will find that this is the lost opera that is very little known about. Nowadays, of course, these sheet music printouts allow us not only to analyze these pieces, but also analyze the opera developments in Germany in 1930s and 40s. Looking at Dawn's English Banner, you must first of all remember how it came about, or what motivated this opera, or what was the context in which it was composed. Dawn's opera is part of the German romantic operas that are based on the Crusader stories or Crusader themes. The first German opera in the 19th century that began the story of the Crusaders and created national romantic movement around it. What was Carl Maria von Weber's Euryanthe in 1823. This opera revived the movements and the ideas that stemmed from the German poetry of the time, from the Heidelberg School of Poetry, and created an additional interest about folklore and past of the Germany. This interest was driven by many more factors than the enamorment with the past, and Henry Heine described it very, very precisely in his article Romantic School, published in 1833. And he asked the question, what is the Romantic School in Germany? And Heine gave an answer to it. It was nothing else but medieval poetry's Renaissance. And this poetry that stemmed from the Christianity was nevertheless the flower or the petal of suffering that grew from the blood of Christ. Since the premiere of Euryanthe of Weber up to Dawn's English Banner here in Riga, and the first premiere was in Vienna, we can see the full development of the German opera, and it also has Dawn's opera as one of its key elements. So since Weber at the premiere to Dawn's English Banner, with medieval stories underlying them, there are similar operas that were produced in a great number, but there are only 3 to 4 that focused on the Crusaders in particular, and I've included the main operas that were composed by mid-19th century, composed by the German composers, but you could also add Rossini here, the pasticcio opera of Rossini. It's a sort of a juxtaposition or a mix of various pieces either composed by Rossini or by the others, and this opera pasticcio was based on the Walter Scott's Ivanhoe, or Verdi's, for example, Lombardians in the First War of Faith, and Otto Nicolae's Il Templaria opera, or the Knights Templar opera, which was written in Italian but actually was composed by a German composer. So all of them are sort of linked by Walter Scott. It was sort of a Walter Scott mania that was in 1920s and 30s among German opera composers, especially Ivanhoe, which was very, very popular and became the storyline for many, many operas and musical pieces. There are various reasons for that. In case of the Rossini's pasticcio, Ivanhoe was a sort of a reaction to the market success, or response to the market success of this novel. And I don't know why, he would have aligned his Cinderella story to the Anglo-Saxon and Norman combat storylines. For these composers, it was Crusaders was an important element of the German identity. Don's opera music that I have discovered myself by listening to it and by playing the sheet music on small piano in the National Library, has made me realize that there are 3 key features. First of all, opera in its musical genesis combines the modern tradition of German and Italian opera of the time, and by Italian opera I mean the stylistics of the way songs were sang, plasticity of the melody, as well as rhythmic changes and combative notes in the Italian Risorgimento manner, and also some of the Italian tragedies of the 1930s, such as Bellini's Norma or Donizetti's Belisaire. Second feature is the role of the ensemble in the opera production, and it is a feature that comes or is very distinct in the German opera composers. And the third feature is the role of choirs or choral singing in Don's opera. I'm talking about Liedertafel tradition and its integration into the opera. Don was the disciple of Karl Zelter, and Zelter, out of the Berlin Singing Academy men, was the first who in 1809 created the first Liedertafel choir with very strong nationalistic undercurrents. The male choir in the early Romantic opera German opera was a very popular element, like, for example, Hunter's choruses or songs in Weber's operas. These choirs united the nation and spoke of its patriotism, and also the modern social life, the musical Biedermeier witnesses were this was indeed what brought the Don's operas together, and along with the English banner it also reflected the Protestant music traditions, and Don also added his own original choral song to this opera, his own take on the choral music with a lot of allusions to the well-known Lutheran melodies. In conclusion, I would like to underline the sort of found opera, or the lost opera that we have finally found, has created a vast field for research when it comes to this specific genre of opera. It is very, very valuable and should be interesting not only for Latvian musicians but for the whole opera world. It was staged here in early 19th century. It was composed here in Riga. For us, it's very important. It opened a new chapter in our opera history and should be therefore thoroughly researched. Thank you.
Perhaps you have any questions? You know, I'm the last speaker. Yeah, that was my suggestion as well. Perhaps we could show interest into some sort of peculiarities in in Dorn's sheet music. Well, probably we need expert analysis of the handwriting. But in view of the fact that on many pages we see Dorn's, assumedly Dorn's comments, he even has placed dates when he wrote an area and so on. Actually, we can establish chronology of how these opera pieces have followed each other. But actually, I have a question. Can we say that this music is sufficiently important from the point of view of music, or we are just happy having this sort of historical souvenir? Or what's your opinion? Would anyone be now eager to produce this opera? I have considered this question. But before we hear a concert performance, I'm not speaking about full productions, that would be very expensive. But before we hear this concert production of this opera, we won't be able to give an answer. But we had 2 choirs performed from the opera. And I believe we would even leave humming this hall, because these choirs, this music was very attractive, very appealing, even perhaps in a popular manner, we might say like this. But there's one more point to be taken into account. I did not mention during my presentation, but I read all those 43 pages, the whole text, the whole manuscript. And I discovered there are so many nuances also in the text itself. It's important to understand what's happening in the opera, what the script is, what the plot is, and I believe there are many important details. I kept mentioning Walter Scott as one of the sources, but it appeared in 1825. And already in 27, Aufenberg, German writer, published a play, The Lion of Kurdistan. And again, the protagonist is a Muslim. And also in this opera, we see this world of the West and the East. And that Lion of Kurdistan was produced also at Riga City Theatre. And around 1853, it was still on. So, but what is this? What kind of texts we have in it? Kenneth, the Scottish knight, tells Richard the Lionheart, and he tells him in a very sort of nationalistic passage, you can ridicule me, but you can never rob or deprive me of my fatherland. And this whole motive of fatherland, we heard it also in this knights choir, Austrian knights, but we see this patriotic motive. It was very strong in this opera, and it's very pronounced. And this the English banner, of course, it's a major romantic opera with very patriotic content. Well, to conclude this sort of the series of these wonderful presentations, I will ask Zaiga and Maris, will you produce this opera when this theater is ready? We will think about it. Well, that's a promise. Well, thank you, and thank you for the days that we have spent here together, and let's meet again at the evening concert. Thank you.